Hello, welcome to the Endo meeting. It's December 11, and we have two agenda items, one about yet another surprise in Hermes, and then one from OCAP kernel, and we will definitely get to it, I hope. All right. Leo, you want to show us what you found in Hermes this
Yeah,
time?
sure. Yeah, I described this as maybe the final boss getting locked down to work on Hermes. It's on this step, which is remove unpermitted intrinsics. We've known it for the past few years as whitelist intrinsics. Um, yeah, what happens is we get this error, SES error, which is on promise.caller, which is a symptom of a lot more errors. If we want to see the full list of problems with Hermes, it's basically happening on a lot more intrinsics. And the pattern we can see is it's happening on the callers, the arguments, and then also the prototypes, but the prototypes are already being dealt with in cauterized property. So the question is, how do we deal with caller and arguments?
Yeah.
So
And important detail here is that these are very unfortunate attempts at implementing use strict. So these are strict functions that should not have these
Look,
properties specifically.
they're
And they
strict functions.
do, yeah, and they do have these properties because of how Hermes uh, implements strict mode. So these properties are um, own properties that whenever you touch them, you get an error saying restricted in strict mode.
yeah,
And they just happen to be actual properties, but behind the scenes, they're implemented as sort of selectors that whenever you touch them in any way, uh, just uh, just trying to reach them on the object throws that error. And they only show up on strict functions. And this is how the engine implements strict mode for functions, where it puts color and argument properties on the function, and then internally in the function, they are somehow hooked to the internal scope, but this is where they reside. And so they are not a threat, but at the same time, we don't want to keep them in any other case outside of Hermes. So we will need to find a good way to select for them. And also, contrary to the prototype before, they are non-writable and non-configurable.
Question: are they data properties or getter setters?
The closest we got to inspecting them, uh, we got color being an actual function of sorts, but when they are in this strict mode, they are behaving like getters with throw inside. But they're actually implemented outside of
So
JavaScript by Hermes, I think.
quick, sorry. Can you it throws when you do a get on property descriptor on them?
We can get property descriptors, and we did. I don't remember exactly what we got other than non-configurable and no writable field, but I could reproduce. Do you want to
Yeah,
see
if
it?
you get it, what I'm wondering is that is there a is there a value or a getter whose identity we can check on? And sorry, I am not aware. Like, this is the first time I hear about this problem because I've not been following the Hermes stuff, but this is what I would look at, like see if it's a shared, maybe a shared value or a shared getter that you can recognize somehow as being safe.
Okay. So give me a second to prepare, and if I could share the screen now. I'm going to show you this. So this is a file where we were experimenting. Currently, the only uncommented items are the self-invoking function that's strict that creates a regular function within a strict context. So it's also a strict function. And then if we try to touch color, let me demonstrate that first. Yeah, we're getting restricted in strict mode.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, if you could do, I think.
I don't need this for now, but I need this one. Okay, so I do JSON. We don't have proper console logs, so apologies for the JSON, but I
That's
do get
fine.
on property
Oh,
descriptors on,
yeah,
we're using
yeah,
A.
that will help. That the JSON will not help you because if you have a function in there, it will be removed, and we still don't know if it's a getter or if it's a value, because both of them are functions. So you need to
Oh yeah,
test for
that's
the
true.
exact
Okay,
value
so
or
I'm
the,
going to assign it to,
just do get on property descriptor and keys object.keys in the descriptor so we can just see what's in there. And we only care about the caller, right? The descriptor for caller.
yeah. Okay. Mhm. I think that's what we're after. Is that correct?
That works, yeah.
Okay, and we can first print in case it's an actual JavaScript getter and there's no value. Oh, okay. It's an actual getter and setter.
Can you do the same thing on two different strict functions and check if the getters and setters are shared or not, if they have the same identity?
Oops. Okay, so we need another function and everything. Let's use this one. It's going to be more helpful. Okay. Okay. Yeah. It is the same one.
Oh, nice. So you can test behavior of those, like make a straight function, test the behavior of that strict function to verify that it actually has the throwing behavior that we want, and then recognize all of these um, as being the thing that you expect it to be. So if it's something else,
Okay.
then
Yeah, so that would be a more performant version of what we already put together. Leo, if you want to take over.
Yeah. So yeah, what works is if we allow for this Hermes behavior in the permit. So yep, here's a small modification to the permit. So if we say this is a strict function, we can go ahead and check this strict function, the props. And when we hit caller and arguments, then setting it to the accessor, yeah, then lockdown completes. And yeah, it's an accessor that we expect it to be. So getter and setter. And that's defined, I think, just below as well, the accessor.
yeah. So that seems very similar to what I was saying, except like it's accessor. So you're allowing any accessor there. I don't remember, Richard, is in the permits, is there a way to saying this is a specific value for an accessor? Like, can we say like the accessor has to be a specific get and set?
I don't think so. A specific value.
Yeah, I would say no as well. They are descriptions of things, not specific values. The closest you can get is a type of value.
Right.
Yeah.
So I
So what
guess,
you suggested is we could do the try catch once on something that we know has to be there, or in a function that we create in line like here, and then collect the value of the getter and use that for comparison. And hopefully it's going to be the same for all of the props, not one getter
oh, I see
per
you're
prop name.
right. So you're,
But that's something to explore. Yeah,
yeah,
not
I think,
throwing every time is going to be faster though.
yeah. I mean, the thing you can probably do is just double, like, what is throwing every time? It's only throwing every time. It's only throwing 3 times for checking
Oh,
each of
actually,
the on top, right?
it might be possible after all. I'm looking at permits.js, the documentation, or starting around line 220, and a string value equal to a primitive type checks against type. A string value equal to an intrinsic name checks against the value of that intrinsic.
So we would have to define a new intrinsic.
This might, well, the intrinsic must be defined. These might already be, but if not, then yes. So if we wanted to go that way, it looks like it's possible.
Okay, I didn't
Yeah.
fully get it. So we can define a new intrinsic, but there might be one that happens to be the same value, or we have to find an already defined intrinsic that has the same value. Which is it?
So there may already be an intrinsic to reference here. But if not, then to use this equality check would require creating it, like
Yeah, but
providing the
that
definition.
sounds right anyway, because when you think about it, you kind of want to define this as an intrinsic because it needs to be frozen as well. If it's
Right, and
shared.
I'm expecting, what is the name of this? I think it's throw type error. So in ECMA 262, there's an add restricted function properties operation, which defines on a function caller and arguments where the defined property is an accessor, the get and the set are both equal to the realm's throw type error intrinsic.
Wait, so
Okay.
this is spec thing already?
Yes.
Okay,
But add
then we could
restricted
use that.
function properties itself is only called against function.prototype. And that is part of create intrinsics. Yeah, it looks like this just needs to exist.
Okay, so I'll suggest we take it async and try to find it And if we don't find it, we'll get back to you with more questions. But for now, this is very useful. And the last question on this topic that we wanted to ask is, like, if we poke our heads out of the rabbit hole for a moment, is this something that looks like everyone wants as part of SES?
Like,
Because this is going to be somewhat Hermes specific. Any other engine could have this behavior, and the more we make the function finding those precise, the further we get away from it being just for Hermes and potentially for other engines. But we're not going to have many engines, and this is probably a precedent in finding permits dynamically. And the question is, do we want that in SES in general, or is it going to have to only exist in the Hermes build?
I think if you're finding a new intrinsic there, and by intrinsic it's just like really as a shared value that exists in this case in the host, really. I don't know.
Yeah, so I'm sorry, go ahead.
It's fine for me. To me, it seems fine to basically dynamically expand the permit list, especially if we verified it's a specific value that is known to be safe, to have a safe behavior.
Okay.
I don't know what you think, Richard, but I know it's a
I'm wondering what
precedent, but it
exactly
seems
you're
fine.
saying, because per spec, caller and arguments exist as accessor properties on function.prototype, and that does not appear to be dependent upon upon the goal. So it's true for scripts and it's true for modules. It just, those properties exist on function prototype. They exist now in V8.
Yeah, the problem here is in Hermes, they exist as own properties on the function itself.
Okay, great. That answers my question. I was like, so, what variation are you seeing here? So yeah, the fact that they exist as own properties, that is definitely a Hermes specific thing.
Why did Hermes put them as own properties? It makes no sense. Like, why wouldn't they put it as on the prototype?
It looks like they had some difficulties with fidelity of the implementation because they dug themselves into a ditch somewhere implementing functions, because there's problems around async generators, there's problems around items that should be visible inside of the function being props on the function itself. They just had to stash some things because they had nowhere to stash them. And the newer version, the rewrite, is not supposed to have most of these quirks, but for practical reasons, as in if we want to use it in production in 2025, we have to figure out how to support current Hermes.
Got it. And they will not fix the old version. All right.
Yeah, because the new Hermes is a project that has the word parity in its first line of description, and any project that intends to reach parity with a legacy project of the same name is going to be delayed at least a year. That's a law I coined.
Yes. We've all been there.
Okay, so no vetoes on putting this in SES.
I mean, I'm not going to speak for Mark, but I have a feeling if we're careful enough on what we're allowing, not basically as long as not any random accessor, as long as it's a specific value that we've tested to be safe, I think that is fine.
Okay, sounds good. So some research is necessary on our end to make sure that it's always the same accessor and they're not creating various accessors. But if that's the case, it should be fairly easy and quite similar to what we already have.
Yeah.
Okay, that's it for that topic. Leo, any closing remarks?
Yeah, I was just going to mention, I saw an hour ago, yeah, Mark mentioned he wouldn't be here, but the expedient temporary fix may very well be what we've already done. But yeah, he suspects the right fix is to send a PR upstream to Hermes, and fixing it on the Hermes side, I think, is a bit bigger than
Yeah,
expedient.
so the current Hermes implementation will not accept that fix anymore because we've reported similar things. Both Lavmode and Agoric reported similar things before, and they are being fixed in the parity project, not in the current version.
Okay.
So we need a workaround, and the decision is between having it be permanent in SES or having the build process added to the Hermes only version.
Okay.
All right. Yeah. So cheers to whoever's watching the recording. We're looking forward to your takes in the pull request. And now I think I can hand it over to Eric.
Yeah, so the OCAP kernel topic for today is regarding whether and how to migrate live slots from Agoric SDK to the Endo repo. And there's already been some preliminary discussion about this on Slack. I believe Brian Warner's on the call to discuss this topic. So yeah, Brian, do you want to start us off maybe?
Yeah, so I guess I don't know a good way to proceed. So some background I can provide. I've always thought of or tried to think of SwingSet as kind of its own product for which the Agoric chain is the primary consumer, and tried to sort of line up APIs so that it could be used in other environments, in other host applications. And to that end, we have talked about having the 5 or 6-ish packages that make up SwingSet moved into their own repository. So currently we have the Agoric SDK mono repo that has all of the swing set stuff, a bunch of XSnap stuff, and a bunch of everything about the Cosmos level, everything about the contracts, kind of, the whole stack is all there. And that adds, mono repos provide some benefit for deploying things. It provides some problems for sort of naming the versions of the individual pieces, and doesn't necessarily make for a very smooth interface between component number 1 and component number 2 when they're both in the same repo, and you can just arbitrarily change both sides at the same time and think that you're deploying them at the same time. And to kind of be more disciplined about that, I've advocated for moving the swing set stuff out to a separate repo. I think there are a lot of challenges with that, and the utility versus the cost has never been great enough for me to kind of get anybody else on board with the idea of doing that migration. If we were to do that, then that would include the XNAP package, the supervisor bundle, which includes live slots, the live slots package that is dependent upon by that, the lockdown bundle, which is what applies SES, creates a SES environment inside that world. The Swing Store package, which is where the database lives that supports all the state stuff for SwingSet, and then the SwingSet kernel itself. So that set of stuff could conceivably be in a separate repo that would then have more sensible versions to it, which would make it easier to kind of point to those things from the outside. But it sounds, from what I understand here, that what you mostly need is the virtual object definition stuff from within live slots.
There's more to it than that. There's basically all of the grungy machinery having to do with message dispatch and promise resolution handling and all of
stuff
that.
that creates presences and handles
exactly.
calls on it.
Yeah, and for my current purpose, there's sort of a longer term issue about the appropriate packaging to have, sort of good order and discipline as to how all the pieces come together. At the moment, I personally am less concerned about what package it's in, what repo it's in, um, than I am about sort of functional dependencies.
Mhm.
And in particular, what little landmines might be associated if you were to attempt to use live slots in isolation from all of the rest of the swing set stuff.
Mhm.
My initial investigations of that over the past couple of days uh, look to me like actually it was not too bad. I think you already did the heavy lifting when we moved live slots out of the swing set package into a package of its own. Um, um, and so I think it's probably useful to separate out the sort of packaging and modularity hygiene questions and sort of process engineering questions from the, you know, can this thing be used in its own universe, if I provide the appropriate, um, the various things that it has to be provided as capabilities as services in the make live slots call. And my initial read is, as I said, actually, I think it's not too bad. Then we have the longer term question, which we raised in the Slack thread, which is, um, how much of a earthquake do we suffer if we can't do synchronous database access? And my read on that at the moment is asynchronous database access in this stage is a complete non-starter. Um, um, and I've had some ideas about how to cope with that, but that's and so that sort of functional dependency stuff is kind of more what I'm concerned about in the short term.
Okay. Let me queue up stuff for after Matthew's question. So, yeah, if we pretend that there's a copy of live slots that you can use, ignoring the mechanics of where it lives in a repo, what are the dependencies of it, and then the atomics idea for the synchronous access stuff. Okay, Matthew.
Right.
So my concern is that there's a lot of semantics coupling between swing set and live slots. In particular, like, for example, promises. There is concepts about like how the promise subscription and also resolution is. You can't resolve promise to another promise, stuff like that. There is assumptions that promises are not durable, meaning that live slots doesn't create a durable promise that can be resolved in a later incarnation. So the kernel will go on and on behalf of the VAT will go and reject all the promises that were decided by the VAT. The kernel also has some logic about like knowing some stuff about like some non-durable exports and splatting them, I believe, or there's something like that where we stop that out into the kernel logic.
Does that matter, Chip?
Yeah, I think that's all functionality that we want, and we're implementing our kernel to do those same things in the same way is, I think, actually the correct technical path, just on its own terms. I mean, just in terms of the problems that the decisions to do things in particular way were meant to solve are problems that we will have, because they're just intrinsic to the space that we're working in. And absent some grander conception of how it might be better, I think that the trade-offs that were originally made in swing set are suitable for our purposes. Now, for example, being able to do durable promises would be awesome, um, but it would be equally awesome for you guys. So, once when and if one of us figures out the magic recipe for making that work and is prepared to implement and deploy it, well, hey, I'm on board.
Benefits everybody. There's one coordination problem I see, or things that we have to figure out, is the protocol between the live slot side and the kernel side. So kind of
Yeah.
live slots bottoms out in that syscall interface, and
Yeah.
it exposes the dispatch interface, and that has a certain set of methods that behave in a certain way. And
Yeah.
so at the shallow end, things like the fact that the kernel is going to cancel all those promises, is going to reject all the promises when upgrade happens, is kind of an implicit assumption that both sides are making, and it's kind of baked into that side. Something that we've talked about is how, adding a new syscall, adding a new kind of method you can send in, interpreting the arguments of those things differently. How could you manage two different versions of live slots in the same active kernel? The kernel kind of needs to know what version of live slot it's talking to for each individual, that adjust the communication, have some kind of adapter for it. That's the kind of thing that becomes more, it's already important to think about, but it becomes more obvious that it's important to think about if live slots was in a separate package in a separate place with versions coming out on their own cadence. And it's not like the kernel gets to pretend that just by changing something in live slots, the kernel is allowed to start using the thing right away.
Thankfully, it doesn't get to pretend that already, and
Yeah,
that might
yeah,
actually
yeah.
force, that might be a good thing, because it might force Orion thinking through the effect of changing things on both sides, because we know damn well that because the kernel changes something, that doesn't mean live slots has been changed and the
Yeah.
VAT has been restarted.
And so far we've dealt with that by never changing anything about that protocol. We've talked about and have sketched out some designs for some kind of versioning information there, so the two sides can negotiate, or at least one side can reveal what it's capable of doing to the other side, and the other side is the one to adapt. We'd probably want to push through some of those efforts and get more of that stuff done earlier if we were going to move live slots to somewhere else.
Yeah. And as I say, for current purposes, if I just import the package from the Agoric SDK, I can proceed unobstructed. The only complication from you guys' end is now you have to be aware that you have somebody externally who is depending on that code, and so if you make some breaking change, we need to be in the loop on that.
Yeah.
But that would be the same if you put it in Endo or in its own repo, as well. So I don't think that fundamentally changes.
The problems I see with the current one, so like you said, I think the dependencies are not bad right now. Like, I think live slots depends upon a couple of Endo things, some of the like zone stuff. I know handled promise has been that dependency forever, and that's been in Endo for forever. The zones and the exo stuff, I think, is coming from Endo as well.
Yeah, but it's not a dependency of live slots.
Yeah, the exo stuff is just built on top of what's already there. We're already using that, so I don't think, but in a kind of non-durable way.
Live slots depends on some patterns things from Endo.
It does have a dependency on exo, on Endo/exo. And I think that our kind handlers, the implementation of kinds, uses some of the code from exos.
Yeah. Right. Well, we are already sort of kind of all in on dependencies on lots and lots of different Endo packages. So
yeah.
And I think in particular exos is something that we've already been using. So that doesn't introduce anything new. I mean, it is a complication, but I don't think it's a new complication.
Yeah. The two dependencies I'm seeing right now that aren't coming from Endo are agoric/internal and agoric/store. And I think that's for the implementation of all the like the heap zone.
The store stuff is all about exos and support for those. And I don't know about internal.
Store needs to move to Endo.
Okay.
I mean that I think that's something that we've talked about for a while now. Store should be moving to Endo.
And I'll just look for what internal is being used for. I know it's kind of a grab bag of stuff.
I might be looking at an old version.
My guess is internal is used for the GC in GC and get quiescent or something like that, and not much more else.
Prepare test env does an agoric internal ses install ses debug. It's not used in the source directory. It's used in one test. Make upgrade disconnection is used in one of the tests, and the tools directory that creates the kind of fake environments for other stuff pulls in install sysdebug. So it might be possible to pull that out, or there might be a better way of expressing that. I think that had to do with allowing unit tests to believe they're running in the same kind of environment that VATs would be running in.
Yeah, so that's actually a good point. The fake live slots test environment, some of it is coming from swing sets, but that can probably be moved somehow.
I've always wanted that to be in a separate package anyway.
Yeah.
So okay, so that's one thing to figure out. Once we and getting Agoric Store moved off to Endo is another thing to figure out. Once we get those in place, it also has a dev dependency on Agoric K-Marshal that Chip wrote way back.
Yeah, I already.
And that's probably manageable.
It's very manageable. I mean, I already actually implemented a version of that locally.
Yeah.
But I just assumed use the one that's in.
Okay.
It's already in there just because why duplicate?
So once we get that in place, the next weirdness is you'd basically be importing it from npm, and you're going to get, the thing available to import from npm is whatever version most recently went out as part of an Agoric SDK release process, which is like upgrade 16, upgrade 17, upgrade 18. We don't have like nice sensible live slots version 1, live slots version 2 numbers on there.
Right.
So that's a wart. I don't think that's particularly bad.
You do have dev versions that are automatically published to npm for every commit. Which solves the problem of relying on us making release.
You'd have something stable. It's not a very healthy relationship between software vendor and consumer of that library, right? It's like if we're really honoring the idea that Swingset is a separate product and live slots is, we should have normal version numbers, release notes, cadence.
Yeah, I agree with all of that, but I think I can cope because I know a guy.
Yeah, right. You got my number. Yeah. So okay, so if we assume so for now, for this discussion, we say you're going to grab this stuff from npm, it's got a weird version number, but it's stable, you can point to something that's there, and the dependencies are something that work for your environment. Then I guess the next most complicated thing to talk about is kind of release cadences and when stuff goes out, and that's a difference of having an Agoric SDK versus Endo versus standalone. And then the next one above that, which is a doozy, is synchronous VAT store access.
Yeah, and I'm actually far more concerned about the latter.
Do you want to talk about that for a bit?
Well, yeah, I was just telling the OCAP kernel team this morning, I had one of these ahas as I was dropping off to sleep last night, which is, as we raised in the Slack discussion, there's this weird perf issue with having lots of web workers. The web worker being the thing that you need to get synchronous mode OPFS access, which is what SQLite requires. Okay. The aha I had was, wait a minute, you don't have to run every VAT in a separate web worker. They're already compartmentalized, they're already isolated. You could run them all in the same web worker. Now you're opening yourself up to some availability vulnerabilities across that at that point.
You lose that protection against infinite loops.
Yeah, which could be a real issue. On the other hand, we're pursuing a model where we deploy VATs in what I've been loosely calling subclusters, which is, these three related VATs, share all come from a common configuration, which might be different from the configuration that's used for those two VATs over there. And it may be sufficient to have one web worker. God, it's hard to say that.
No.
Per subcluster, because we'll have relatively few of those, I suspect. And kind of satisfies from there. There is, I want to understand better what the performance issues with multiple web workers actually are, because I have been told that MetaMask, really got burned on that, and had to retrench, because just running each snap in its own web worker was the obvious thing to start with, and then that turned out to be problematic. But I don't know if the performance issues stemmed from specifically from how the communications patterns with snaps interacted with web workers and it wouldn't apply to us, or whether it's just a problem with having multiple web workers in general, that is going to screw you no matter what you do. The small amount of research I've done, poking around various websites, there have been apparently lots of people playing around trying to see how much parallelism you can get out of web workers, and it looks like pretty much all of the perf issues that people report seem to have something to do with the communications relationships, rather than the fact that it's multi-threaded. So it might be that we're okay, or it might be that we're hosed, and I'm not sure there's a graceful way to find out short of trying it.
So one question I want to ask is, way back when we talked about each VAT in its own worker and then using atomics and shared array buffer in order to get data across a boundary to a kernel/swing store database worker, and blocking on the atomic to tell when the other side had written something as a way of getting synchronous blocking that store gets. Is that still on the table? It's been explored?
You don't need
that.
You don't need that.
Sounds sketchy.
Okay. I mean, that was our kind of desperate idea, to be able to get a VAT per worker, or a worker per VAT, and still get synchronous blocking reads.
Well, as Chip said, as long as you move the VAT store into the process or the thread of the worker, most interactions then are limited to message send and notifies and subscribe, which don't need
specifically don't need to be synchronous. So the reason we couldn't do that was because we need the VAT store state to be coherent and snapshotable and hashable in a block.
Right.
Maybe you don't need that
property. And when I was pursuing this during the interregnum between Agoric and Consensus, the thing that, and this is also the thing that Matthew was talking about the other day, is pretty much all of the traffic that goes back and forth between the VAT and the kernel, once you get the VAT store stuff out of there, can be one block of stuff that starts at the beginning, delivery or whatever, and then a single block of stuff that comes back at the end, which is all of the message sends, all of the state upstates, all of the garbage collection,
which you and I carefully designed it to be, to support this kind of async execution.
Right. And so there is some further code evolution that's needed in order to be able to report all that stuff back as a singular bundle, basically hold it enqueued until the end, and then deliver the whole queue in one shebang, which it doesn't do now. But it could, and it's one of those simple matter of programming things, which will I'm sure be nastier than it sounds in just glibly talking about it. But
the supervisor that hosts live slots, that's providing the syscall object to live slots, is the one that would do that.
Yes, that's right. And I'm already planning on doing some magic with the syscall object anyway, because some of the requests are going to get forwarded to the kernel, and some of them are going to be handled locally, the VAT store stuff, so that the VAT store requests still go through the syscall interface, because that's what live slots is coded to use. But the servicing of those happens in the same process.
Yeah.
I've been thinking also about how we go about if we move the VAT store in the worker, what do we do? Because for committing that, what do we do for commits, and especially what do we do for state sync exports, because we need to find a way to have a blob that can.
We've got a gigantic ticket talking about all of the hashing and rollback issues, but I think those are things that you guys don't need.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, we're not.
No, but it's something.
We need some commitment.
Yeah.
Chip and then Matthew.
Yeah. we need some commit stuff, but it can be considerably less sophisticated. The current two-stage commit thing that is currently used, I think, is entirely adequate to our needs. Um, um, but I'm sorry, I just lost my thread. Go ahead, Matthew.
Yeah, so first, you only need to do a commit, and you do need to do a two-stage commit, but you only need to do a commit when you actually tell the worker to generate a snapshot, because anything from the snapshot on, you don't need to remember the VAT store. So you only need to remember what the what it is from when you did a snapshot. You
Right.
don't
We're not
need
trying to
to.
do deterministic replay, and so all of the
that
all of
simplifies
the
it a
hoop
lot.
jumping that is necessary to have that work is sort of out of scope for us.
Nice.
Yeah. The other thing is, so for your case, really it's a two-stage commit, but only at the time where we're doing a snapshot of the worker. That's it.
Right. So I may not even
So
need that. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Chip, are you all doing snapshots, or do you have like excess inside WASM or something?
We went down that road for a while, and we kind of gave it up as a bunch of extra costs that didn't really buy us anything.
Okay, good.
Okay.
That simplifies things.
We have been
So
thinking
you're
that maybe
doing
some short-term orthogonal persistence just for as a additional layer of reliability might be helpful, but we just decided, yeah, nah, it's not.
Okay.
so you're doing a full replay.
Or you just
You're
don't
doing a
need
full
long
replay of the
VATs.
whole
We
VAT?
don't need replay. We just think of the VATs as being like computational
Not so
engines that do
durable.
stuff, and they could have errors, or you can, because we're not trying to replicate the computation. So whatever actually ends up happening is reality, and nobody has to, we don't have multiple parties who have to agree on what reality is, because there's only one reality.
And so I guess your VATs are not as durable maybe as the ones in the Agora chain.
Correct. And in the browser
They're allowed
environment,
to
they kind of
die.
can't be.
Yeah, it's a lot harder. That was a big reason we backed away from solo nodes on the Agora side.
Because you're going to get shot in the head at random, unpredictable intervals anyway, just because.
Yeah. So
Somebody
best effort.
Somebody can press Command Q.
Best effort survivability.
Yeah.
All right. So then you don't need
Okay,
snapshots. You don't
you
need
just
transcripts, replay.
right. So you just execute, and then that's it. You forget your execution. Why do you need a VAT? Why do you need virtual and durable data then?
It's just a simpler programming model for saving your persistent state that you want to be deliberate about.
Is the durable state durable across VATs getting shot in the head?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay,
cool.
Got it. Okay, so you're relying on the code running in the VAT being able to restart at any time from durable state.
Yes, and we still need the transactionality so that you at least get clean breaks at crank boundaries. But
yeah.
We don't need to, as I say, we don't need to replay.
So you're actually good with a commit of the durable state of the swing store state, or sorry, of the VAT store state at the end of the delivery.
Yes.
Yeah. Is it per delivery? So you're actually you're doing per delivery commit?
Yes. Or well, I won't say we are, because we're not doing anything yet. But that's the plan. That's the plan.
No, I mean we
like
found that it was very difficult without durable promises. We found that it was very difficult to program resumable contracts. So resumable is what we call a contract that can restart from durable states. So resumable contracts ended up being very difficult to program against if you can't make some assumptions about some promise that you can just await and not have to watch and things like that. So
yeah, I think that's yes, I think that's a real
and so we have a notion now.
But
we have a notion of three different classification of promises that are basically synchronously resolved, which your next turn you're going to get your reaction invoked. Promises that are immediately resolved, where you're guaranteed they're resolved within your crank, and then promises that are promptly resolved, which is really our notion of a promise that is resolved by the end of the run. So a set of multiple cranks that were triggered by an external input. And so that, like, when multiple VATs exchange messages, you know that if it's a prompt promise, you can await it because you're guaranteed there's not going to be a shutdown or anything, or restart of VAT or anything like that that will be, or in your case, probably a commit of the state. So we would only effectively commit in between. In your state, in your case, it would be equivalent to committing once you've run swing set to quiescence from the external input it received. So all the VAT ping pongs got done.
Yeah, I think one of the things which is not clear to me at the current stage is the intended use cases for the things that people would be running in the VATs that would be running under the OCAP kernel. To what extent those are behaving like smart contracts, and versus to what extent they're simply things that are performing services for the user. And so it's not, I think the requirements are fuzzy, at least in my mind. It's possible that Eric understands this more deeply. It's not clear what the requirements for that, for the ability to hold on to promises for longer periods of time would be in our intended set of use cases.
Right. This is actually something we're trying to clamp down on, which is except for specific patterns, promises should end up settling every time the kernel gets quiescent. So anytime you're done processing some external input to the kernel, except for some known patterns, there should not be no unsettled promises.
Yeah, so that's an interesting thing. Are you going to end up with something that some higher level abstraction that looks a lot like promises and has kind of the semantics of promises, but it's not like a JavaScript promise, but it's
we do right now. It's called a vow. It's called a vow. And basically, if you want to resolve something across external input like that, you have to use a vow, or else you might not be able to upgrade your contract. Your contract might break in all kind of way. This is of course all until we can implement durable promises.
Without durable promises, we're kind of in these epicycles of like, well, make promises handle faster. Oh, they need to go longer. Make a thing that isn't promises. Yeah,
is correct.
Unfortunate.
Is I think the right idea there.
We're epicycling.
To the extent that you guys have machinery which successfully implements those things, I don't see any deep reason why we can't parasitize off the same machinery.
You may not want to.
I'm nervous about the programmer model that the developer of the thing that's going to run in the VAT has to confront. But that's more of an ergonomics issue than a can I make this thing work issue.
Matthew, the Cosmic Swing Set meeting has started.
Yeah, we have to go, but there's a lot we've built on top of that to make that more helpful for programmers. But
so I think as a starting point, getting live slots from NPM, it's got the right interfaces there. Let's agree to work to make live slots not depend upon stuff from the Agoric tree and only depend on stuff from the Endo tree by either moving things like what was it, Agoric store over into Endo and splitting up whatever the heck Agoric internal is so that we could have live slots be a bit more standalone there. And I think other than the like awkward versioning and release cadence kind of things, I think that might get you most of what you need.
Okay. All right. Well, that sounds good.
And in general, I'm totally happy to have like other, other programs, other projects be using this stuff. And I'd love to
Yeah.
get it into a place where it's easier to have an ecosystem around it.
I figured that might be your take
Yeah.
on things.
Yeah.
And I think the stored stuff probably already kind of wants to be an Endo, and the agoric internal is just kind of a slot bucket anyway. So
and it's specifically for that, creating a simulated VAT environment for test code, which I think kind of wants to live in live slots itself.
Yeah.
Is my suspicion.
Everyone.
All right.
Okay.
Well,
good
thanks.
talking with you guys.
Okay, thanks.
All right.